about dyslexia, a learning disability. Two of us have dyslexia, and you can't tell who it is because it's an invisible disability. Our first speaker is Mrs. Oliver.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, as Holly said, we're going to be talking about dyslexia. I have a couple questions. How many people have heard of dyslexia? How many people think they know what it is? So, lots of people. Well, hopefully you gain a little more insight after our presentation this morning. So, as Holly said, I'm Janet Oliver. I'm the educational specialist here at Holy Angels. Before I came to Holy Angels, I worked for many years with people with dyslexia. So that's been my background. Thank you. Okay, take a look at this slide. What do you think these people have in common?
They all play basketball.
Good guess, good guess. So, we have Albert Einstein, great mathematician and physicist. We have Octavia Spencer. You may have seen her in a couple different movies, The Shape of Water, Hidden Figures. We have Leonardo da Vinci, great Italian artist from the Italian Renaissance. Whoopi Goldberg, comedian and actress. Cher, actress and singer. And Magic Johnson, we all know Magic Johnson, also great athlete and basketball. So, as you might guess, all of these people are accomplished in their fields, they're talented and successful. They all have dyslexia. There are many other famous people who have dyslexia: doctors, lawyers, presidents, authors, business, and financial executives. Thank you. Okay, what does the word dyslexia mean? This is from the Greek language. The prefix dys means not. Think of words you know that start with dys, like dishonest means not honest. Displeased means not pleased. Lexia comes from the Greek lexicon, which has to do with word or written symbol. So if you're not doing well with reading written symbols, with spelling or writing written symbols, that's basically what dyslexia is. People with dyslexia struggle with reading, usually with spelling and writing as well. They may have mild, moderate, or severe dyslexia. They may be able to read, but they often read inefficiently and inaccurately. So, this is how a printed page may look to a person with severe dyslexia. I want you to pretend that I'm a person with severe dyslexia. This is how I might struggle to read this passage from Grapes of Wrath. See if you can read it to yourselves as I struggle to read it out loud. So let's see. The moving, questing, that's a Q, not a P, people were migrants. Looks like one, but it's not. Those families which had, looks like devil, but it's not. It's those families which had lived on a little piece of land, who had lived and died on 40 acres, had eaten or, starved on the, is that a P or a Q? Produce of 40 acres. Had now the whole west to Rogan. I'll stop there. Okay, while a person without dyslexia would read as follows. The moving, questing people were migrants now. Those families which had lived on a little piece of land, who had lived and died on 40 acres, had eaten or starved on the produce of 40 acres, had now the whole west to rope in. Okay, so let's get back to the question. How does it feel to have dyslexia? What did I struggle with? as I read that passage. I made mistakes identifying some of the words, many of the words. I read very slowly, without fluency, and because I was working so hard, I didn't get the meaning of the passage. I would have to read this over and over several times in order to get the meaning of the passage. So you can see it's a slow process and very hard work. So, question, how is dyslexia diagnosed? It often involves 2 full days working with a psychologist, psychological testing. They start with an IQ test. Why do you suppose they start with an IQ test? They want to see where you are, where a person is in their ability to think, to reason, to problem solve, to process information, to think critically, to compare, contrast, etc. It's not reading, spelling, or writing, or math. Then they do a reading test and spelling tests, etc., memory tests. They even have you sound out nonsense words. And what they want to see is if there's a significant difference between a person's intelligence and their reading skills. If there is, that's dyslexia. And you can see on the chart, that's a bell curve, that on the right side, that would show really high intelligence. On the left side, that would show low reading ability. If a person has low intelligence and low reading skills, that's not dyslexia. That's something altogether different. Okay, so dyslexia is diagnosed when there's a big difference or a discrepancy between a person's intelligence and their reading skills. Holly will say more about that when she shares her information. So, are there upsides of having dyslexia? You bet. Oftentimes, people with dyslexia have very creative and inventive minds. They're very intelligent. They can think outside the box. They're persistent, and see how that would be required. And they have great endurance. However, according to Dr. Sally Shaywitz, who is an MD and an educational researcher, when students do not receive the appropriate instruction and support, there can be a big downside to having dyslexia. There's approximately 20% of the population has dyslexia, and 80% of the people with dyslexia are in jail or are incarcerated. They often have poor jobs. Many drop out of high school if they don't have the proper treatment. And many have low self-esteem, depression, and frustration. So it's really important that this disability is diagnosed and that early intervention, early treatment is part of their educational program. So I would now like to introduce Holly Letkin, and she will continue.
I'm going to give a little bit of introduction about myself because I feel like some of you might not know who I am. My name is Holly Letkin. A lot of people call me Holly. I'm a senior here at Holy Angels. I'm 17 years old. You guys might have seen me running retreats as I am a part of CMT. I'm also a 2-year varsity tennis player and also now a 4-year varsity softball player. And a little bit of background about me: I have a dad, a brother, a sister, and a mom. And I also have a dog, but she's not up there right now, so you'll see her in a later slide. So kind of starting off with my kind of younger life. As you can see up there, I went to a French immersion school, so that means that I spoke French throughout the whole school day. So during the 1st grade, kindergarten, and all the way up to 3rd grade, all I taught was French in the classroom. And I really didn't start learning how to read and write English until 3rd grade in school. So as a way to kind of keep my learning ability up to all the others in the class, my parents made me read every single night. And one book that I really remember very well is Green Eggs and Ham. So who has read Green Eggs and Ham? So a lot of us, right? So you kind of know like kind of pages there, like maybe say less than 5 words, maybe a little bit more than 5 words. And it took me about 10 minutes to read each page. And you know, that's not a very short book, it's a long book. And so it took me quite a while. And of course, since my dad was making me read it every single night, and I was in first grade, of course I threw a temper tantrum every single night about reading this book. So it about took me an hour and a half just to read this simple little book that you would call simple, but I would call very hard for myself. So one day at school, since I was in first grade, I was doing portraits in class, and I was so worried about how my hair and my skin color were both yellow and how I just looked like a yellow blob on a piece of paper. And I look over, and my friend, she's reading this massive book, which is massive, and I asked her, oh, hey, what are you reading? She's like, oh, I'm reading Harry Potter. And I was like, wow. And I look at the first word, I can't even read the first word. And I look back at myself and I think, I couldn't even read a single page of green eggs and ham. It kind of clicked in my mind that I was a little, well, just a tiny bit behind the rest of the class. But of course, as I was in first grade, I just kind of went about my day. I started to fall more and more behind in the classroom, and my parents decided to get me tested to see if I had a learning disability. And just to give another kind of brief overview of testing and how I was tested, I took an IQ test, and I kind of tested in the 120s to 130s range for my problem-solving abilities, how I looked at new problems, and the reading and writing skills I was showing in class were about a low 70. So you can see a big discrepancy up there in the bell curve. And so that helped me diagnose with an IEP, which an IEP is an individualized educational plan that helps students with learning disabilities get accommodations in school. So kind of transitioning out of my French immersion, now I was back in a full English kind of setting learning, though I was still learning French most of the time. In middle school I had a big change. In my grade, I went to Valley View Middle School, so that's about 300 plus kids a grade. And let's say about 10 to 20 of them had IEPs. Now, if you times that by 4 grades in middle school, that's a lot of kids that have IEPs. And so the school was having a very hard time tracking my IEPs. And since I went to a public school, my case wasn't as severe as the peers around me. So a lot of the times I got looked over, I was placed in wrong rooms for testing, I wasn't getting the help I needed, some teachers didn't even know I had an IEP. So a lot of the times I had to go up to the office all by myself and tell them, you know what, I have an IEP, I should be in this room for testing, I should be getting extra time, and that's how I kind of learned how to self-advocate for myself in middle school. Transitioning into high school, I obviously transitioned into here, so it was obviously a smaller setting. I kind of went through 3 kind of stages of how I interpreted my disability within myself. And the first stage is kind of an acceptance of myself. So let's pretend I'm back in 9th grade English or reading a whatever passage, and I have to read a monologue of whoever we're reading about. And I always skip over words, I mess up on every single sentence, whatever's coming out of my mouth doesn't make sense, and the people behind me on the sides are snickering and just talking to themselves and looking at me weird, thinking, wow, she can't even read a single paragraph, like this is so easy. And I was thinking to myself, wow, this is really hard for me. But I still went home that day, and I still had dyslexia. The next day, they did the exact same thing. I still went home with dyslexia. I did realize that whatever people said or did around me didn't matter, that I still had it. Whatever they did, I still had dyslexia. So I had to come into an acceptance term that, yes, I had this disability. And then I come into my embrace stage. Now, of course, I'm still a little bit timid. I'm still not very confident in the fact that I have a disability and that I am diagnosed. But I have to come to terms with that I have this. And people now start asking me openly about, oh, do you need help on this? Or, oh, can I help you on something? And I tell them up honestly, yes, I have dyslexia, I would like some help. And I kind of explain to them what dyslexia kind of does to my brain and how I kind of help the symptoms and what I kind of do to kind of make my day easiest as possible. And so I come into this embrace stage where I embrace it. And now, as a senior at Holy Angels, I'm transparent with my disability. I could honestly care less if someone says, wow, you must be really like dissing me or just very judgmental about my disability. It's my disability. Whatever you say, whatever you do, it's not going to change the fact. I am proud that I'm diagnosed. I am proud that I have dyslexia. And that I come with now speaking to strangers, families, and friends about my dyslexia and how what challenges I've overcome, how I've dealt with my challenges, how I've transformed as a person now into a hardworking and very endurant kind of person today. So a lot of people, when you think of a diagnosis or you're being diagnosed, they think of it as a weakness, whether that be a physical one, a mental one, or any kind of diagnosis. You think of it as a weakness. You think of it, oh my gosh, I need to help this person. I need to do something to make their life easier. No, I've been here before. I can do it by myself. And so I've also come to terms with that now I feel that my disability is a strength and not a weakness. I feel that because of my disability, I am who I am today because of it. And now it's a part of me. Okay, so kind of going back on the fact that having a diagnosis comes with help and how at first I was ashamed to be diagnosed. At first I was very timid. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to speak during class. I purposely made sure teachers did not call on me on class to make sure I wasn't called so I wouldn't talk during class. But now, since I'm transparent with all my disabilities, I'm willing to step up in class. I'm willing to speak up in class. And I am proud to be a dyslexic, and I'm proud to be who I am today. Thank you.
Just like Holly, I also have dyslexia. Just like you, I'm an alumni of Holy Angels. I walked the same hallways you walked, and in fact, I had some of the same teachers that you have. Some of the differences is I was a co-star, you're a star. I was being a co-star. After college, or after Holy Angels, I attended a college in Dubuque, Iowa. After college, I had a few jobs, and eventually I found myself at a company called Plus Relocation Services. You probably never heard of the company. We are a relocation management company where we help companies move their employees for new jobs, whether it's here in the U.S. or internationally. At Plus, I serve as the Senior Vice President of Client Services. Typically, I don't talk a lot about what I do in my day-to-day job, but I think in the context of this discussion, it might add value. I'm responsible for global operations at Plus. What that means is I have responsibility for those that serve our clients and get to meet with them on a daily basis, whether that's here in Minneapolis, Shanghai, Hong Kong, or London. I also get the privilege and the opportunity to work with some of the biggest and best well-known companies in the world consulting with them. Examples include Google, Tesla, and Twitter. I also sit on the board and participate in panels within my industry and serve on the executive management team at my company and have the honor of participating in the ideation and strategy of where we're going as an organization. And I do this all with dyslexia. My journey started very similar to Holly's. In the second grade, I was finding that I was falling behind my peers when it came to reading and writing. I couldn't keep up, and I just struggled day to day. My parents decided to get me tested, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia. It quickly got me support through training, and I spent a lot of time one-on-one working with someone to help me find opportunities to learn and grow with my disability. With that disability came a lot of emotions. I was anxious about what my future might hold. Would I ever be successful in my careers? I was frustrated with my inability to do the same things that my peers were able to do. But mostly I was overwhelmingly embarrassed. At that time, I didn't know what dyslexia was. I didn't even know what a learning disability was. And I had no idea anyone who had one. In my house, we weren't allowed to talk about it, and I certainly was not going to talk about it with my classmates. In fact, when I went to my tutor and someone asked me where I was going, I told them I was going to piano lessons. Thank God no one ever asked me how I was at piano, because I was actually quite awful at it. In my high school and college years, my journey progressed. I was nowhere near as far advanced as Holly. I certainly would not have stood in front of my classmates and talked to them about my disability. But I was starting to embrace it and understand what it meant and how I could overcome it. In my professional career is really when I learned to build my confidence in my skills. I now know that I have the skills and ability to be successful in my role and in this environment. I'm also proud of the opportunities I've had and and I attribute those to my dyslexia in many ways, so now I'm quite thankful for my disability. Holly has asked me to talk about what it means to have dyslexia in the workforce. I think it's important to know, and Ms. Oliver touched on this, is that dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence. Someone with dyslexia is not dumber or is not as smart as somebody else. In fact, we're creative thinkers. We have the ability to innovate. We see paths and connections that most people aren't able to see. I think it's also important to note that no two cases are the same. We all have different experiences, different jobs, different personalities, and different training. So every experience and every person is a little bit different. Up here, I've noted some common characteristics and struggles of someone who has dyslexia might experience in their work. Public speaking is very challenging for someone with dyslexia. Obviously, if you have trouble with the written word, it's challenging to speak that in front of other people. Writing, reading, also very challenging, whether that's personally or when you're trying to share ideas with those around you. Because it takes you longer to process and absorb and get to that next level, time management is very challenging, as well as you have a tendency to have information overload, which can lead to mistakes. Whether that's a mispronunciation, whether that's an error in writing or reading, perhaps it's a mistake in information that you're entering into your system. The reality is that everyone struggles with different things. I think with dyslexia, you can have experiences day in and day out, but when you have stress, when you have high emotions, the dyslexia becomes a little bit more prominent, and again, that can lead to mistakes and being overwhelmed. However, it's not all downside. I think once you learn how to manage and deal with your dyslexia, whether it's through tutoring, whether it's through training or experiences, you can find ways to manage it. For me, I've identified environments or instances where I might have an issue with my dyslexia. Public speaking is obviously a place that I'm not as comfortable in. However, when I know I'm going to engage in one of those environments, I know that I have to over-prepare. I have to be prepared and confident walking into that experience. Technology is also a very helpful tool for someone with dyslexia. Simple things like spell and grammar check are a godsend to us. Additionally, in today's environment, you also have special fonts, that is dyslexic communities that helps them read and write better, as well as things like speech to text. For someone who struggles to write, that's a fantastic tool. Also, as a dyslexic, you learn how to work around some of your challenges. Reading and writing is obviously an issue, so what can you do? Use visual tools. Perhaps graph it out, chart it out, do a process map. I use those tools on a regular basis to get across significant concepts or challenging ideas to my peers. And obviously, as Holly talked about, peer support. Surround yourself with people who care and will support you during those difficult times, whether that's a manager, supervisor, teacher, or a friend. What I've learned from dyslexia. I've had a lot of fantastic experiences, and what I've learned is I need to be able to embrace those unique experiences. I need to take on challenges that I'm not comfortable with, and I need to do those afraid. And I need to know that in those situations, I will make mistakes. I'm sure I've made mistakes in the last few minutes with you, but guess what? I forgive myself. It's okay, I learn from it where I need to, and then turn the page and move on to the next thing. I also know, based on my experiences, that I need to work twice as hard as my peers. I need to put the extra time and the extra effort into my work. I'm comfortable doing that, and I can say with total sincerity, this has tremendously helped me in my work environment. I work extra hard, and I've noticed for that, and I've been given opportunities because of that. I think the other thing that I've been given is the opportunity and the clarity to understand that I need to be empathetic and sympathetic to others. I know that everyone has a challenge. Mine is dyslexia. Somebody else may have a physical, mental, social issue. We all have our own situations, and the more we can be empathetic and sympathetic to those around us, the better we will all be. And lastly, I choose to look at my disability as a gift, not a curse. It's given me opportunities that I'm thankful for, such as the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Okay, now just kind of as a wrap up with everything we've kind dyslexia, if you feel that you have some of the symptoms that we have been talking about today with dyslexia, go see a professional. Just because you think you might have dyslexia and just have a couple of the symptoms does not mean you have dyslexia or another learning disability. If you have any questions, please contact me or Mrs. Oliver in room 3255, or also known as the RTI room. As we come to a close, I want to thank you for your attention today and for your time.